Good afternoon and welcome to the regular council meeting of Olds for April 8th. I call the meeting to order at 1 p.m. and I would ask at this time if council has any added items to the agenda. All right, seeing none then, we will move down to item B, adoption of the agenda, please. A motion, Councillor Blatz.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that we adopt the agenda for Monday, April 8th, 2024 for the regular and closed council meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Blatz. I will now call, is there nothing further? Okay. I will now call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. Page 3 of your agenda, item 2A. I'm looking for consent now for the minutes of March 25th. Are there any questions? We have consent. We have consent for the minutes for March 25, 2024. Item 3, we have no delegations and presentations. We will now move forward then to bylaws. Page 9 is 4A. Okay, and that will be the waste management bylaw. And today we are looking for all readings. Is there an introduction, or would you like to go forward, Mr. Williams?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I'll turn this over to Director Pedro, who's with us today.
Good afternoon, Council. So you have before you an updated waste management bylaw. A bit of background on this document. The current bylaw was put in place in 2005, so it is quite dated. Clearly hasn't been looked at since then. We felt a need, since our collection program changed, to relook at that bylaw and just update the levels of service and expand on a number of different items. To give you an example, the old bylaw did reference old town facilities like recycling stations, and also did reference mentioning for any sort of liquid waste that it would be taken to the old town wastewater treatment facility, which of course we don't currently operate anymore. So the new bylaw, I won't go through it line by line, but I'd be happy to take any questions. But in terms of what we've introduced or expanded on, you know, things like provisions of the bins, responsibilities, putting in actual collection schedules in there, waste preparation requirements, which is quite a big one when we're talking, you know, enforcement and public education on how things need to be placed in the bins. We do address construction waste in there as well. We've added the spring cleanup, household hazardous waste, and Christmas tree programs as well, since those are all services the town provides. And we've included things such as acceptable and prohibited material lists, so that's clearly defined for the residents. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Blatz.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. Do you want first reading first and then questions, or?
Yes, I can ask for first reading.
Okay,
if
I'll
you'd
give
like
first reading then,
Thank
and
you.
I do have a question comment.
All right, go ahead with first reading and then your comment.
I move that council give first reading to Waste Management Bylaw 2024-07 as presented. And thank you for that. And just a note of clarity here, something I wasn't aware of, and it's probably been for quite some time, but on page 15 or 13.3, A, that compost is not to be placed in biodegradable or plastic bags. And at one point in time, we were selling the compostable bags here at the town office. And I know we used to purchase them, and I'm not sure when this changed, but I'm terribly at fault for using those compostable plastic bags, not paper bags. Is this the standard now?
Yes, a lot of facilities across the board have made this change relatively recently.
Oh, okay.
So they can't process those types of materials
Okay.
anymore.
So then we should do some really public education on this, so our residents are aware that they will need to change that system somewhat, because I think many of us are still using those biodegradable what we call biodegradable, supposedly biodegradable bags. So I would suggest that we make some public awareness to this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Ryan.
Thank you very much, Mayor Dahl, and certainly I had that one marked up too, because I definitely have one of those plastic bags right now that I was using for compost, so obviously I'm gonna have to just throw that material away. So good point, Councillor Blatz. I have a question on page 13, sorry, 6, D, which is prevention of having construction waste spilling over to, over on highway or other public property. I'm just wondering if we shouldn't include neighboring properties in this. When I think of public property, I think about property like that the town owns, as opposed to like private property right next door to a construction site. That would be private as far as I'm concerned, but I'm not sure if that's the detail that that's necessary, or I was just thinking maybe adding neighboring properties in that.
Yeah, I think that would be a worthwhile amendment. Yeah.
Any other questions? Councillor Cummings, and then back to Deputy Mayor Ryan.
Thank you. If we can go to page 12, 3.2, where it states that the town doesn't, and I'm not too sure here when we look at the wording, but the town shall not collect waste, recycled, and compost materials from commercial industrial institution premises. We are currently doing that, I believe. I can name 3 properties that are businesses or institutions that have the 3 bins outside their property. The St. Paul's Presbyterian Church, or Lutheran Church, sorry, in downtown, their alleyway is the same. We share an alleyway. They have the 3 bins out their back door. I'm not too sure if they get picked up, but they have the bins, as well as 3 businesses that are on the 50th Street in the alleyway have the bins as well on the 500 block. So, and that's just because I drive through those alleys. I see the collection bins in the alleyways. They're not residences. The ones on 50th Street, my daughter lives in that alleyway. She has bins. She's a resident. Some of the other residents have the bins, but the 3 businesses that share the building that she lives in also have those bins, and those bins are collected. So I'm not too sure if this is something we're just unaware of, that we have exemptions to, that at one point we did allow, but now we don't allow. So I'm leery of leaving this in here without some sort of caveat, or at least a better understanding of whether or not we do that, or we don't do that, or why these businesses and institutions have these bins if we're not collecting those bins. So I'd like some more clarification on that one before I'm willing to leave that into the bill. I do have 2 other sections I'd like to talk about too, if I can at the same time.
We just get direction from Director Pedro on the first item.
So 3.2 is worded more, or well, yeah, perhaps there could be some wording added there, but that's more so to deter any collection from those commercial, industrial, or institutional properties that require the large commercial collection, so the large metal bins. Those locations that do have sort of the residential provided carts or bins there, those aren't really a concern for the collection program. So perhaps in 3.2 we can add that, shall not collect from these locations that require commercial size bins. So
Go ahead, Councillor Cummings.
Thanks. So maybe some more thought can be given to that one, because I think that proposal ought to need a bin or something. That's a bit ambiguous. Who knows if they need a bin or a big, obviously if they're filling those little bins and not a big bin, they don't need a big bin, they just need the little bin. But the wording is very clear in that we shall not do this, right? So either we need to change that, remove it completely because we do it under certain circumstances, or not. Obviously, and again, I don't understand the requirement to say that we won't do that. If a business, a small business, only needs that service of having a blue bin, green bin, and black bin, and they're paying the same fee as any other entity in town, whether it be a residence or not, I don't see why there's a differentiation for that. If they require a 6-yard bin, like my business has a 6-yard bin because it requires a 6-yard bin, I make that much garbage. Obviously, I guess I could just buy extra bins for the town. I don't see the differentiation necessary here unless we're going to specifically say that we will not be in the 6-yard bin pickup business, which we're not. This phrase just confuses me, and that, to me, I don't understand a distinction between a business that can use the roll-out bins.
You. I will let CEO Williams next.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Dahl. And yeah, so the businesses that do have roll-out bins, it's not a firm nor fair, I think, comparison. The factor besides the amount of waste produced, I believe it came up last year, just if they can accommodate the location and storage of the bins outside their properties was kind of the determining factor, one of the determining factors. So in 3.2, I think it can be reworded to have like a secondary clause, like unless it can fit within the parameters of the town's collection system. But we do it for some. I don't have exact numbers, but really depends on the scale of the business. It has to fit, obviously, to their needs of the 3-bin collection cycle. But also, we just can't give the roll-out bins to every commercial business because of the storage implications and therefore the pickup implications as well. So it's something that I don't think we should take away from those people, but I would say in the practical application of deciding if, say, your business, for example, is eligible for that, it would come down to the logistics of the towns and its service provider to see if that's.
I would like to give everybody their chance to talk. Could I come back to you? I will be coming back to you. If you could go ahead to finish then, Councillor Cummings. I got 2 other councillors that have been waiting.
Absolutely, I understand the process. So if we go to 3.2 and we take the word shall and remove that, because right now shall doesn't fit. Pardon? Yeah, should, may, whatever, as long as it's not shall, right? Because shall is the directive that it has to be done, right? And in this case, shall not means it cannot be done. So again, if we change it to should not or not normally or only under these circumstances, happy camper. That would solve my concerns with 3.2 entirely. But as it words right now, I don't think it's appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cummings. I'll move over to Deputy Ryan's been waiting. And did you have a question? Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Mayor Dahl. Just before we move on to my question, perhaps we could word the concern for Councillor Cummings in the fact that we leave the way it says shall and just put at the end, unless it fits within the town's collection system. And that way you would have both bases covered. Would that be appropriate, Councillor Cummings?
Well, absolutely, and we do see that quite often in the bylaw where unless the CAO or his designate has blah, blah, I mean, just cut and paste that phrase into the end. It's the same thing as removing the shall, just having a caveat at the end saying unless this is met.
Okay, thank you. And so my question would be on page 16, 14.3B, and I find this kind of funny. You're asking people not to put their bins out any earlier than 7 p.m. the day before collection. Well, first of all, I find that would be totally unenforceable because if you drive around town, even on my own street, and I've done it before, I've put my bin out many, many, many times before 7 o'clock. It just seems to me that some people put it out in the morning of the day before, some people put it out at midnight the day before, but I think it's something that is not enforceable, and then also there is no associated fee for a fine. When you look at the list of the rates for fines on the back, I saw nothing within that schedule that shows how we would fine somebody for that. So I just think that could be removed entirely. I totally agree with the first one, no later than 7 a.m. because I've had the collection come down at 7 a.m. on my street. So I agree with that, but the before 7 p.m., I just think that's not doable. People have their bins out earlier than 7 p.m. all the time.
You, CEO Williams.
Yeah, I'll just speak and then let Dr. Pedro. Just 2 quick things. First, not everything in the bylaw has to be enforced through a penalty scheme. That's clear, and this never would be, and or really enforcement. It really is an advisement to residents. When you think 7 p.m., except those who have perhaps Monday collection dates, town activities, whether it be plowing, street sweeping, road maintenance, just more of asking people, to wait till then. Most people don't, myself included, but I'm also a Monday collection, so it's not such a huge thing. But it's not something we would ever fine someone for, therefore require a penalty schedule. It's just, I believe bylaws can also have that instructional or advisory role as well. So, Adrian,
Okay.
anything else to add to that?
Fair enough.
Excellent point. Did you want to speak, Director Pedro?
Yes, just to add to that, where this comes into play quite frequently is in certain areas, certain municipalities where there's an issue with, say, wind, for example, and those carts are put out fairly early, and suddenly you go down the road and the town needs to clean up a bunch of material that's spread out everywhere. So there's reasoning for the suggestion anyway.
You still have one more question, Councillor Cummings? And then I'll go to Councillor Wilson.
Deputy Mayor Ryan did address the 14.3 that I thought was also a little bit too early. I live in a neighborhood full of 55-plus homes, and those carts are out at 7 in the morning. Boom, like clockwork, the whole street. That's how I know which bin to put out. So, and again, same for me. If I come home at 5 o'clock at the end of a day, I take my bin out before I go inside the house. So having an arbitrary time set, and I understand the importance of it not interfering with other operations that are happening in town, like street sweeping or snow plowing and things like that. But that's, again, why we put the signs out, right, saying street sweeping and snow plowing. So to me, it would be almost better to just say the day of collection rather than a specific time of collection. But I know it's not enforceable, so it's not really a big deal.
And thank you for that explanation as well, CO Williams. It was good clarification. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. Through you to Director Pedro, I have a very basic, simple question coming from some folks that engage with me, and it's concerning page 23, the acceptable list Schedule B. And again, probably the question I get asked most often, where do I put my glass, the non-refundable glass? And sorry to take you into the minutia, because we reference their pop bottles or take to the depot. So for a non-refundable glass container, blue bin or waste? Simple question from people that I engage with. Thanks.
I will give you a simple answer. That goes in the waste bin, in the black bin.
And would I be able to add on to that? The questions I get a lot around my neighborhood are, what are we supposed to do with our oils that we use for like PAM and things that say flammable? Where does that go?
So if those bins are empty, and when I say empty, I mean completely empty and dry, those should be put in the waste. If there's material in them, technically they are considered a hazardous product, and they should be dealt with appropriately. So it has a proper facility, or in the town's hazardous waste collection program that we're working on.
It's good to hear that we are working on that, because I understand the hazardous place, which they've asked, do I have to drive to Disbury to? Okay, well, thank you very much, and I hope that they've been able to hear that we are working on something to solve that. Councillor Blatz?
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. Through you to either CO Williams or to Director Pedro. On this Schedule B on page 23, I think it's probably a good idea to do another educational piece, and maybe you're already working on it, to the general public so people are aware, and that could eliminate and alleviate a lot of questions that we all receive in regards to this, because I know, as sad as it is, throwing glass jars into the garbage is, I have a tough time swallowing that every time I have to do it, but it is the reality that we're in at this point in time.
Just like hazardous waste spray things we use for cooking and things, because I am with a lot of seniors in the area I live in, and they really are concerned about what to do with those. So, Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl, and somewhat of a supplement, but maybe through you to Director Pedro, could you just talk about the stream then, like once our contracted service picks up the bucket, compost or black bucket, I think we know what happens, or the blue bucket, kind of what the process is, where they go and what happens to them? Thank you.
Sure. The black waste bins, they go to the Didsbury landfill. And then the compost bins go to an agricultural facility that uses all that product and converts it into usable material, generally soil. And then the recycling goes to Lethbridge, or excuse me, Red Deer. Red Deer. Sorry, I'm in the wrong part of the province. So.
Question, thank you very much. It sounds like we might be ready for our second reading. Oh, we're still talking, I'm sorry. Yes, you
Will I
are.
be doing a friendly
Yes,
amendment as amended?
thank you very much. So we do have a motion on the floor right now from Councillor Blatz for first reading as amended. And I'll call for a vote. Those in favor? That's carried. I appreciate the discussion prior to, and I'm sure administration has caught everything that we have spoken with today. A second reading, please. It was a tie over there, so I'll start with Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I make the motion that council gives second reading to the Waste Management Bylaw 2024-07 as presented. As amended.
Amended, yes, thank you. I will now call for the vote then. Those in favor? That's carried. Unanimous agreement for third reading. Deputy Mayor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move the council unanimously agrees to consider third reading of the Waste Management Bylaw 2024-07 as amended.
Thank you, Deputy Ryan. I will now call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. And third and final reading, please. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that council give third reading to the Waste Management Bylaw 2024-07 as amended.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. I will call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you for the dialogue and discussion. We will now move down to item 4B, page 27, and this is the water bylaw, looking for consideration of first and second reading. C.O. Williams?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl, and Director Pedro has the good fortune to lead us through this one as well. Adrian, please.
Thank you, Council. So a bit of background on this water bylaw. The town's current water and wastewater bylaw essentially speaks to three different areas, one being water, one being wastewater, and the third being water conservation. In our assessment of that bylaw, we decided that we were going to split the bylaw into three. So having separate bylaws for each of those categories just provides better clarity, better enforcement and detail in each one of those areas. So this iteration of the water bylaw is the first part of that process. And so we are asking council to take a look at the bylaw. We're introducing new concepts or expanding on concepts. Items like quantity, size, depth of services, providing more clarity to developers and landowners. We're introducing the concept of mandatory connections. This is one that you're seeing within the last 5 years. A lot of municipalities going to this direction, just to get away from those alternative connections when there's town services provided. We're speaking to thawing of a service. This speaks to more the operational requirements that our staff deal with. Looking at boilers, meter chambers, bypasses, protection of meters and remote readers, providing some more detail there. And then speaking to testing or calibration of water meters, which is a pretty common issue as well. So quite a few updates to the bylaw. And so at this point, we're asking council to do first and second reading only. The intent is to do the third reading once we have the water conservation and wastewater bylaw presented to council so that we can repeal the old bylaw all at once. So just a procedural intricacy there.
Thank you very much, Director Pedro. I'd like to get first reading and then we'll ask questions. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I make the motion that council give first reading to water bylaw 2024-09 as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, and I'll open the floor if councillors have questions, starting with Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to start with a quick comment, and then I'll go into a question or two here. I understand the importance of having good regulations surrounding a bylaw and that good depth of interpretation, but I believe it belongs in regulations, not in the bylaw. The bylaw is large, it's convoluted, it has a lot of specifics in it that really a bylaw, in my opinion, shouldn't have. That's why we have regulations, policies, and procedures. So there's a fair bit of that I could see that written a little bit better, but I like specifically, I'll turn to paragraph 70. So I didn't write down the page number that's on. Sorry, thanks, 34. So this one I'm a little confused about just because of the process involved in how we make legislation. So the town having constructed or caused to be constructed, operated, maintain the water supply. No, in accordance with this bylaw. And then the Municipal Government Act, which I thought is kind of a weird act to be specified here without the other acts and laws that the province and the federal government have put in place in water, like the Environment Act, which dictates when and how water gets sampled. So in my opinion, this would be better worded as this bylaw, policies, and regulations is set up by the town and any and all applicable legislation and regulations. The Municipal Government Act doesn't really cover, I may be wrong, it might have a word or two in there about water supply and stuff like that, but the vast majority of water regulations that the town has to abide by are not in that particular piece of legislation. So if we're going to put a specific piece of legislation in there, I think that's kind of the wrong way to go, and just say all applicable provincial and federal legislation is required. That would protect us from everything else that the bylaws should be protecting us from when we talk about the authority of that bylaw. And I understand that the Municipal Government Act is what gives us the authority to create a bylaw. But this particular wording is more about how we maintain the water system, which is other pieces of legislation.
Thank you. Who would you like to speak to this? Director Pedro?
So in terms of reference to the MGA specifically gives the municipality authority to provide the water utility as a service. So that's more so where this wording has come from. I think I'd be open to a wording change there just for clarity. But this bylaw is more specifically geared towards the municipality as the approver of providing a water utility service and the regulations behind that, as opposed to specific testing regulations from environment or the federal government there. So, yeah.
Thank you. Supplemental, Councillor Cummings?
No, I get that the MGA, and that's how, again, they give us the authority to run a water system, they give us the authority to create bylaws, and I believe that's in the whereases normally, at the beginning of a bylaw, where it says whereas, the very first, Section 70 Municipal Government Act states that. But when we look at paragraph 70, it talks about how, not the authority to do. So when it talks about the how, I think it really does require us to have a more inclusive paragraph in there that talks more about the everything else, right? Because it's shall supply potable water in accordance with. So when you talk about that little phrase right there, shall provide potable water in accordance with, that's the how, not just the why we're allowed to do it. The whereas gives us the why we're allowed to do it, and I think that's the appropriate place for it to be. This is the authority we have to make this bylaw. But the rest of it is a little bit more inclusive in my vision or interpretation of this statement. So either we need to redefine the statement to be less interpretive and more specific, or we have to allow for a greater scope of authority that the other legislation allows us, as well as the policies and regulations we create by the bylaw.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions? or comments? Deputy Mayor Ryan?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I basically am thinking about what Councillor Cummings is saying, and really, if you take a look at it, some simple terms, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Cummings, with regards to this, but the whereas is right at the very beginning, and on page 28, and it actually spells out the responsibility of the town for number 70. So really, do we even need number 70 when we already are saying that in the whereas at the very beginning of the bylaw? And so, well, all we would need is number 71. The town may or shall supply portable water, period, to whatever. So I'm not sure if that would correct that situation there with what you're saying, Councillor Cummings, or not. Just a comment.
Thank you. Councillor Cummings?
Thanks. Just to maybe clarify a little bit about what I mean by the differentiation between those two statements. The whereas gives us the authority to make the bylaw and gives us the authority to operate a water system. If you read 70, just the after the comma under water utility, shall supply potable water in accordance with. That's how we're going to supply the water. So the first whereas tells us we have the authority to supply water. It gives us the authority to create a bylaw about water. In 70, it talks about how we develop that water or supply the water. And we do that in accordance with the applicable laws and legislation of the province. So more so than just the Municipal Government Act in this case, it would be the Environment Act and other legislation that is the Alberta Health Act and whatnot that all apply to how we provide water. The whereas is we shall have the authority through the MGA to provide water. And those are two different things. The authority to do something and then how we do it are two completely different things under completely different legislation.
Or thank you for that information. I would like to ask Director Pedro if he would like to comment back.
Yeah, I will. To be honest, I've never seen a water bylaw that did reference either Alberta Environment or federal statutes, but I think there'd be an avenue here to just sort of mention those at the end of it, just to provide some clarity there.
Thank you, Director Padu. Are we entertaining then that this first reading motion be amended? And that would be Councillor Wilson to suggest. That's correct. That was kind of what I was going to ask. Would you be able to amend your motion, a friendly motion, and we will discuss what, as through the suggestion and recommendation of our Director Pedro, or would you like to clarify that, Councillor Cummings?
Because this is actually only one question that's been talked about, and I do have several other concerns, a friendly amendment might become too complicated or too convoluted. If we feel that, if council agrees, I could put a motion to amend the section that we can then vote on, and then we don't have to deal with the whole friendly amendment thing. Because I think it might get a little confusing once we go through some of the other concerns I have, and we have discussions on those as well.
I understand now that you have further comments. Then I would ask council at this time that we do it section by section. If Councillor Cummings has more questions, and we will have to speak to our thoughts. So go ahead for that section, the section you're speaking to with your motion, referring to the section.
I'm not too sure the phrasing for how to set out an amending motion, but I'll put a motion in that section 70 of the water bylaw be amended to include, or to remove Municipal Government Act and to include all applicable legislation.
Actually, I already have a motion on the floor. Councillor Cummings, Councillor Wilson has that on there, but we do need to refer specifically to the section that you just read.
Right, so correct me if I'm not mistaken, we can absolutely do an amending motion within a major motion that's on the table. So I do believe procedurally we're doing this correct. So I've put an amending motion on the floor that can be passed or failed, and then we can go back to the main motion or have a further discussion on things.
Deputy Ryan?
Thank you, Mayor Dole. I think we're trying to complicate this a little bit. Why don't we go through what your concerns are, Councillor Cummings, make those, have Director Pedro write down some of the changes that were being suggested, and then bring it back as opposed to going through an amendment for every single section, and then it can come back with what the amendments made, what changes made, and as we have done with other bylaws. That's how I would suggest we do it, rather than going through each point and having a motion for each point. And then when it comes back, maybe not do second reading today because we're going to have amendments and changes to come back to us. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you. I agree with you, Deputy Mayor Ryan. This is not to be complicated for everyone, but we do need to actually get everybody's thoughts and what they would like to say. So if you have something to say, C.O. Williams? Okay. If you would like to carry on then, I don't see any other people. We do have a motion on the floor right now. Oh, right. We have the... Yes, you can withdraw. Yes.
So
I would like to get consensus from council if we would like to just concur with Deputy Mayor
Point of order.
Ryan's notes.
point of order on that.
Go ahead, Councillor Cummings.
It's not a matter of consensus, it's a matter of my decision on whether to withdraw the motion or to ask for a vote on the motion. So it's not a matter of consensus on how we move forward on that.
So Cummings, would you like to make your point then and your decision?
Okay. I am a little torn on this discussion we're having right now, because there's a process, and I'm trying to follow the process that has been laid out in all of the lectures we've had by all of the governance professionals that have come talk to us about this. And I'm trying to do my best in following that procedure, and this is the procedure that they came up with. We came up with one when we invented the Committee of the Whole, where this sort of brand-new bylaw is generally supposed to be at, so we can have a fulsome discussion instead of the vote process that happens here at a regular council meeting. So I'm trying to do what a regular council meeting is supposed to do, and it seems like from the conversation we've had here, the recommendation is to do what we should be doing in a Committee of the Whole meeting when we're discussing bylaw. So our decision here is a greater thing. Are we going to be in a regular council meeting discussing a bylaw and doing the amendments as is prescribed by the procedure, or should we table this entirely and bring it at a Committee of the Whole meeting? So I'll retract my motion on the floor, as nobody seems to want to go that way. But I think we really need to consider that we've created a procedure for what to do and what not to do, and we're not following it. So either we follow it or we change it. And if we are introducing new bylaws like this that are complicated, long, and we do have questions on it, because it is a huge bylaw with lots of information, then it should be at a Committee of the Whole meeting for us to have that back and forth wholesome discussion, not the, this is my opinion and this is my vote, which is what's supposed to be done at a regular council meeting, as per our regulations. So I'll retract the motion, and we can continue that way then.
Thank you, Councillor Cummings, for your retraction or withdrawal, and Deputy Mayor Ryan would like to speak.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl, and I do concur that this should have gone to committee of the whole to have the discussion there, and rather than piecemeal it together right at this point. I think it'd probably be better just to table and to bring it back to committee of the whole, and have that discussion. I do agree that we do make amendments to bylaws and go through that way, but we are in our previous bylaw that we just passed, we made amendments and didn't have to do individual motions on the two amendments we made to that bylaw. So I'm just pointing out that we have done it the other way. So I would ask that Councillor Wilson perhaps withdraw his motion, and then we put a new motion on the table to bring it back to committee of the whole.
C.L. Williams, you have to,
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. Just two things. First, there is timeliness here just because the province is directing us to provide some drought mitigation plans in place. That's why this is coming before council, the timing it is. I don't think first reading's really necessary to debate the efficacy of council's process or get it overly convoluted. First reading can be passed as amended, and we could take notes informally. There's nothing against any rules here. Let's just continue the conversation. We have one valid point from Councillor Cummings. If other members of council have other points, we can take those into consideration, and council can vote first reading as amended, and we can bring it back to April 22nd. If there's no resolution there, May's CAO or committee of the whole is just around the corner. So.
thank you very much, and I agree with that process, and there's been some very good points shared at this table, and I understand now that you're faced with the timing with regards to this, but it is true that we have the committee of a whole to discuss these in deeper detail. So we have a motion on the floor for first reading.
And what I'm saying is so we have the one point about section 70 being noted, so that would be part of the amended motion Councillor Wilson has on the floor. But since first reading is still on the floor for discussion, there's nothing outside of the parameters of good governance. The council can't mention other things it has. And if council wants to delay second reading for next meeting, the same process can occur when more time is allowed. It's just the nature of timeliness and what is before us with the province's expectations and what we think we have to do to get our own bylaws in order to address those.
Thank you very much for that clarity. So we've all heard what the option is today that we already have. First reading as amended, and we'll move forward then. Councillor Cummings?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If we go to page 36 and take a look at section or paragraph 87, I'm a little confused about the whole paragraph and every point in it. Restrictions of town facilities, and then it talks about no consumer shall lend or sell water unless authorized by an agreement. Give away or permit water to be taken. Is this from like my house? If I give a cup of water to my neighbor, am I breaking this piece of this regulation? Because it says I'm not allowed to lend any water. If I have a slip and slide in my backyard, or if I have a park behind my house, I hook a hose up to a slip and slide in the park, and I have the neighborhood kids sliding around it. It seems like I'd be in violation of this particular section. And I'm D, for instance, I have no agreement limiting the amount of water I can purchase through the town. But that section seems that there is a limitation on the amount of water and some sort of agreement on a limitation of water that I'm allowed to have. DE, I'm just confused about E all told. I think I understand the intent of E, that we shouldn't contaminate our freshwater system. Like on the ice in case the water is frozen. I don't think we have any open source water supply in the town of Old. So this whole section is a little confusing for me, and I think that almost everybody is in violation of it, if I'm reading it correctly, every time we give a neighbor dog some water or anything like that. So I am a little confused in there, and if I'm confused, and I'm pretty good at legislation and policy, I think a lot of other people might get confused about this one and whether or not they're breaking the rules.
Thank you, Councillor Cummings. We'll just go to Councillor Blatz and then back to Director Pedro.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I interpret this number 87 as the fact that this would refer to probably some of our commercial businesses and somebody that is in the industry as far as bulk water sales and that type of thing. The majority of this is what it is. And as far as if we want to get nitpicky and start worrying about what we do in the neighborhood with the slip and slide, I think then we're going to go down a rabbit hole we don't need to go down to today. And I didn't interpret this section that way in any way, similar to how Councillor Cummings has decided that's what it is. But that's where I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, either through CAO Williams or through Director Pedro, that this is really technically more to do with bulk water sales and with water constrictions that are coming and conservation plans. I think that this is a good section to have in the bylaw that might help mitigate some of those issues we potentially could have.
Thank you for that comment, Councillor Blatz. Director Pater, did you still feel to speak?
Yeah, so I would echo those comments. I think this section is really geared towards sort of those large commercial users, bulk water sales, also quite geared towards any sort of illegal connections. So say that there's a landowner who's got an illegal connection prior to the water meter, that would be prohibited based on this section. Really trying to narrow in what the uses are of the water. We're really not going to be going around, that's not the spirit of this section, to go around and, you know, penalize people for using water on the slip and slide or for their own personal residential use. That's not the intent.
Councillor Cummings, supplemental.
Thanks, and I appreciate that the intent of a piece of legislation is always important. But when the words in the paragraph state something other than the intent then has to be interpreted or explained, it makes for bad legislation, in my opinion. This nowhere in here does it talk about large users. Nowhere in here it talks about stealing water or bypassing water. And I get that's the intent. I really do. But the wording here doesn't have that at all. So maybe we can add some wordage here that will clarify that for people, because right now it just says consumer, and I'm a consumer of the town's water. Therefore, I have to follow this piece of legislation as everybody in this room who is a water user, which is everybody. So if it is intended for somebody other than just all consumers, and it should say that, and it doesn't.
C.O. Williams?
Thank you, Mayor Dell. Councillor Cummings, you're missing some very important context, though. You're saying you have no contract with the town. You do have a contract with the town. Everyone who gets a service fills out a utility application. That is in this bylaw as well. So there is a whole parameters around the proper usage and how much water you're allowed. Everyone's allowed. So this section, you can go through dozens of sections in this bylaw and pick out words you don't like. But when it comes down to no consumer shall lend or sell water unless authorized by an agreement, everyone has an agreement. So make sure you're reading in the context. If you need more time to do that, for sure, but to go through every section and pick out words that don't seem to make sense, I would argue perhaps the except on ice if the water's frozen, which is not necessarily applicable, but still pertains to stormwater bodies. You can do that with a lot of that, but it doesn't affect the bylaw nor its intentions or its application.
Well, I appreciate you bringing up the contract. So if we have individual contracts, then why not just say no, consumer shall follow the contract, instead of detailing it all here and convoluting things, making things specific in the bylaw that are fluid in a contract, and just say the consumer shall follow the procedure or the contract. I mean, that's contract, that's how contracts work, right? So do we need to even have 87 then, or do we need to just say somewhere in the bylaw, I'm sure it actually says somewhere in the bylaw that we have to follow the contracts we sign?
Bylaws inform the contract. Contracts don't inform the bylaw. You have to have a founding piece of legislation to execute the contract, and that's the purpose of not just the utility bylaws, but I'm sure a host of other bylaws or other levels of government. So this, by having it here, and same to your previous comment, why is this so large? And if you were to research, which you obviously like to do, across many other towns, counties, villages, etc., you will find utility bylaws dozens of pages long, because this is considered the best practice. And to have a contract that has hypothetically clauses not contained in the utility bylaw, that is not good practice either. So I would argue the bylaw should be as robust as possible in this case, and the contract can therefore be less, referencing the bylaw.
Councillor Blatz, and then Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. And going back a little bit to C.O. Williams' comments, because he did mention the first part of this, that or Director Pedro did, that we've broken this out into 3 sections. We've broken it out into water, wastewater, and then what our water conservation will be, which they will all, I'm sure, have linkage, which we will all see in the next few weeks. But as far as item E, removing or on the ice, I think of some of the storm ponds that we have in town, and we don't want to see people taking a oil drum into the middle of the lake to have a fire, and then it thaws, and then you've got contamination within that water system, and many of these are recognized under an Audubon Society or Alberta Environment as far as, I'm sorry, the word had slipped my mind. But anyway, I think that this is fine, again, as it's written, and we can all interpret it how we want to, and we can spend an awful lot of time sitting around this table deliberating every point. But the fact remains is we do have to have bylaws in place, and we will rescind that one, and once we see the other two come forward, I think all these sections will possibly make a little more sense, perhaps, to some of us.
Thank you, Councillor Blatz and Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to just agree with CEO Williams in regards to how this is written and the wordage that's used in here. I believe that this section here protects our water supply, not only the volume of water that leaves from our system, but also it protects the quality of water that's within our community. And so I think that this should stay exactly the way it is.
Thank you very much, Councillor Daly. So what I believe that we've gotten to at this point is that we are going to, we have a motion on the floor for first reading. And it seems that council would like to leave it at first reading, if I'm correct. Councillor Cummings?
Thank you. I'm sorry. I do have some more questions on the bylaw, and this is the proper time and place to ask questions on the bylaw. So I don't want to stifle that in the guise of expediency. I think it is our job as councillor members to question a bylaw when it comes to us and ask all of the questions we have on a bylaw. So I don't want to go to the vote here. I'd like to continue asking some questions, and I do have more questions to ask.
I did not call the vote. I was just speaking, but go ahead and continue.
Thank you. Can we go to page 39, paragraph 109? I'm just confused about what this is actually saying. I don't understand what it's saying. It's fire hydrants installed for fire protection located within town property. Is that fire hydrants located on town property or in the town? Then shall be directly connected to the water main, which they all are, and have a water meter installed. I wasn't aware that our fire hydrants had water meters attached to them. No hydrants shall be connected to service lines unless located on private property. Okay, I'm not too sure what that means, if I could get some clarification on that one. And then I understand that the next paragraph, or next sentence is just that if it is located on private property, then the maintenance and repair of that hydrant would be based on the private property. Like, for instance, the college has hydrants on their property. I'm sure they're responsible for, I think that's what that's saying. It's really just that first part, when it says town property. If I get some clarification on that one, please.
Director Andrew, would you like to clarify that, please?
So when we're talking about fire hydrants and fire lines, which would be above ground if we had to use above ground water movement in some areas that are restricted with underground services, the biggest piece for us is that we're looking to, if we have to add water meterage for a temporary service, or for an example would be like we're doing water main replacement, that above ground water line could be metered for the purposes of that duration. Excuse me. And again, it's rarely there, but it does need to have provision in place for us to either capture water usage or the services that people are going to tamper with it, potentially if it's open air access, if you will. Hopefully, does that explain the intent?
Thank you. Director Pedro would like to speak.
Yeah, I can certainly add to that. So that this 109 is within the Fire Protection Service. So this specifically refers to a building, given its size and its use, that needs a separate fire protection service, whether that be a separate line and or its own hydrant. So this would be outside the hydrants that the town has installed for our own fire protection services. So that first sentence that says located within town property, that just means that that private hydrant would be on town property as opposed to on the private landowner side.
Counselor Blatz and then Counselor Cummings.
And would an example of this type of fire hydrant be something such as sundial? Perhaps, maybe, would that give some better clarity? Is that kind of what you're referring to? That type of a facility?
Counselor Cummings.
I appreciate the explanations. I'm still confused about the wording, but I appreciate the explanation, and I understand the private part, which I think is the intent here, now that you've explained it, so that clarifies with explanation. It just, within that town property is just kind of, so you're saying, if I build a building and I need to have a fire hydrant for my building, I can put an extra fire hydrant that I wanted to have on town property, just because I want to have an extra fire hydrant for my building and not rely on the fire hydrant network? And then if I did that, I'd be responsible for that fire hydrant.
So that could be handled in two ways. So one, the developer could install an additional hydrant within the town's infrastructure, and so they'd be on the hook for those costs and installing that service. Or they can install their own personal fire protection hydrant, whether it's on their property or our property. If it is on the town's property, then there's certain easements that would need to be in place for that hydrant, and they would be responsible for that maintenance.
Could we then add a word in 109 and say private or non-publicly owned fire hydrants, or something to distinguish between just a regular old fire hydrant and a fire hydrant that is owned and controlled and supplied by a private entity, whether it's a business or, and I get it now. I think if you look at Silver Links, I'm sure there's a fire hydrant inside Silver Links that is after the meter that's outside of Silver Links. And I get the idea, but just when I read this, there's no distinction between that and the other thing in the first part of the sentence. But I get the understanding and the explanation now. I think it's just missing a word.
You have anything further, Counselor Cummings?
Different item, yes. If you can go to 118 on the following page. There's two parts. I understand what it's saying completely. Two parts. One I think is missed, and one that is kind of make it a little easier. I'm assuming the fire chief, his assistants and officers are all members of the fire department. Spreading it out like that might not be necessary. The other part is this doesn't include any allowability for mutual aid fire departments to use our fire hydrants, because you're not giving them authority to use fire extinguishers or fire main, because in this sentence you've clearly stated the only people who can use it for hydrants and firefighting is our fire department. So I don't know how to word that a little differently to include other departments that are providing mutual aid, but I think that we have to include that somewhere, or even just say under the direction of these fire hydrants can be used for these purposes under the direction of the Olds Fire Department.
Thanks, Mayor Dahl. And I understand where you're coming from to get absolute clarity. I mean, but in the application of, let's say, mutual aid, it is also in all mutual aid agreements, because it is somewhat a creature of the province, that when you call mutual aid and they arrive on scene, let's say in Olds, that OFD is the command structure. They are acting on behalf of OFD in those scenarios. So from a permissibility point of view, it's still, covered, assuming you understand the logistics of how mutual aid works, for example. Again, I would just not necessarily caution, but absolute clarity and context is not always achievable. So if you think if council believe that's going to add to this bylaw, sure, but it is a can of worms you're going to open here, right?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I concur with the CEO on this one. If another fire department was coming for mutual aid, they would be under the responsibility or under the supervision of our own fire department, and so therefore they would be covered under 118.
Thank you. Are we moving forwards? Councillor Cummings?
Thank you. No, I get that explanation. That's a great explanation. And if the mutual aid agreements that we have allow for that or dictate for that, that's great. That's why I ask questions, so I can get answers. Doesn't mean I'm right all the time or I'm wrong. That's why I ask questions. If we can look at 122. I'm just a little confused if I get some clarity on this one. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing in any way, so yell at me. But I'm just asking a clarification question here. When a plumber is installing their work in a new constructed house, do we not allow them to pressurize the system to test their work or stuff like that? Is there no, I mean, according to this, they're just not allowed to do that, right? Unless they call every time to do that. Is it part of the building permit process that they're allowed to operate the curb stop during the construction phase or maintenance phase or under permit, or I'm just curious about that.
Director Pedro?
Yes, to put it simply, there's a process where they would need our approval to do that. They are allowed to do so, but we typically are notified. We work with them to coordinate that access. So I just to add to that, I think the intent of 122 there is to ensure that there's clarity that the town should be operating those unless there's approval given otherwise.
No, and that's great. I just wanted to know if there is a blanket approval in the building permit through the construction phase, or if it, because that again is a different piece of legislation that we have that covers a different process that could complicate or intertwine with this one, and I wasn't aware of what that situation was. But no, thanks for that. That's a good clarification. Thanks.
Bill Williams?
Yeah, thanks. And just to provide further context, a fair question. So it does depend if it's an individual house being built, let's call it infill development versus a new subdivision, because then if it's a new street, like we saw in the Highlands last year, we have a FAC process, we have pressurization of the entire system, in which case town staff are on site and valves get obviously pressure tested individually. But generally speaking, for curb stop valves in the vast majority of streets, we just don't want anyone touching those, essentially, is what it comes down to. New builds, yes, we can, under town auspices, including the building permit, I'm sure, guide that process a bit more specifically. But this is for the day-to-day, I don't know, we'll call it routine maintenance that may arise.
Sorry? Microphone, please.
So I do have one last question. 123, and you mentioned this in your preamble, Director Pedro, about the boiler. When we make, and again, I don't know currently what the boiler code is in Alberta for installation of boilers. I know the federal regulations for boilers, because that's what I did in the Navy, but I don't know what the provincial code is. Just want to clarify here, when we put things like this in a bylaw, it's to bring highlights or highlight the building code, or to expand upon it, right? Make it more robust than the current building code in Alberta. Is that am I getting that process understood properly?
I would say it's mostly to highlight. So the importance of this section is that we don't want any contamination in the system, right? So it is pretty crucial to put on all three of those devices with boiler installations. It's not something that typically has seen a lot of bylaw integration, but that you are seeing it more and more across municipalities.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Pedro. I don't see any other questions at this point. We do have first reading on the floor. Are we staying with the amendment then? Yes, we are. I will now call for the vote for first reading as amended. Those in favor? That's carried. we are only doing first reading today. Have we consensus on that? Good. We're moving forward then, please, to page 46 of your agenda, item 4C. And this is bylaw for panhandling 2024-16. C.O. Williams?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. So, as noted at last meeting from Councillor Walsh, there was some concerns he brought around the total prohibition, which turned out to be something we should take into account if council wants this to apply as it's currently written to all of town. So what we added here, essentially, since we did largely borrow from City of Calgary's bylaw in robust detail, some of their restrictions, even though from the application point of view, we're focused mainly on private land right now, which has a different level of, I'll call it, enforceability and concerns or lack thereof around complete prohibition. So if council's comfortable with how it reads right now, we believe it's good for third reading. If you would rather it just be for private lands, we could take, obviously, amendment required. However, like mentioned, by late summer, council also should see the persons and places bylaw before it for first reading, which will have this panhandling as part of it. So I think it's meets our needs right now. Getting it to the RCMP as a tool in their toolbox to address what we're seeing right now and primarily at Cornerstone Shopping Complex. But Director Andrew, do you have anything else to add?
Thank you, CAO Williams. No, I think that pretty much covers the provision there, is that the slight modification to give it a little more focus as the concern was raised. So I feel that this is more in line with what those wishes were, and I think it's gives the tool as requested.
Thank you very much, Director Andrew and C.O. Williams. I would I think I need to just confirm with council before we go for reading on this, if you have questions. Any further questions? All right, I would then ask for a motion, please, for third reading. Councillor Blatz?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move the council give third reading to the panhandling bylaw 2024-16 as presented. And thank you to administration for bringing it back with those slight amendments. I appreciate this.
Anna, I agree, and we look forward to the future. I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. Page 50, please. This is item 4D, and this is the tax rate bylaw. And we'll, Director Sheena? Thank you, Sheena.
Thank you. So the tax rate bylaw and the spring budget adjustments are connected to each other. So I have a bit of a presentation that touches on both of these items before we come back to the RFDs and motions. Oh, just one moment. Perfect. So on the first slide here, so every year, once final assessment numbers have been submitted, the operating and capital budgets are brought back to council for final approval along with the tax rate bylaw. At this time, we include any carry forwards from the previous years, being 2023, and then any expenses that have come up in the first few months of the year. So the operating budget being presented today is an increase of $659,247. This includes $502,083 in carry forwards from 2023. The carry forwards being the CP rail maintenance, the work order system, the Sportsplex feasibility study, the active transportation study, the Northeast area structure plan, and the policing study. These projects were all started in 2023, but were not able to be completed within the year. The new items being included in this budget are the OFL interest revenue write-off that was approved by council, the 2024 public Wi-Fi costs, and a request by OFL to cover the 2024 property taxes. There's also an accounts receivable write-off request from the Lions Club regarding the gazebo that was built at the cemetery. So the funding being proposed for these items is $157,083 is in grants. This includes the policing study, the active transportation study, and the Northeast Area Structure Plan. These are all 100% funded through grants. The Sportsplex feasibility study was approved in 2023 with the use of the Destination Olds Collective Fund of $120,000. We have decreased our approved summer students by 1 for a savings of $10,500. This would leave an additional $464,064 to be funded either through tax revenue or reserves. So proposed today in your council motions is option 1 of the tax rate scenarios, which we'll go through in detail further down. But this would result in an increase to tax revenue of $369,690, leaving $94,374 to be funded through this tax stabilization reserve. Next slide, please. So this is where the taxes come into play. Here's a little look at our 2024 tax assessments. The total taxable assessment for 2024 is $1.8 billion. This is an increase of close to $100 million, or 6.17% over 2023. If we look at our 2 main assessment classes, that being single-family residential, it is up 12.4%, and commercial, which is increased by 3.08%. However, I've also included in here, if you look at non-residential as a whole, you will see it has actually decreased by 8.73%. This is particularly important when we look at how the education property tax requisition is distributed. Next slide, please. So looking at these requisitions, as you can see, the education property tax requisition has increased by 9.5%. As you know, we collect this tax on behalf of the province. They provide us with the requisition, and we have no choice but to pass this along to our residents. This requisition is based on an equalized assessment system aimed at spreading the burden equally throughout the province. However, the assessment values that the province uses are based on values submitted 2 years ago, whereas the assessment base that we spread this requisition amongst is from 1 year ago. So this can cause fluctuations dependent on the change in assessment from year to year. So as I mentioned previously, with non-residential assessment decreasing, the requisition, however, for non-residential increased. So this causes a large increase for non-residential property owners in 2024. Mountain View Seniors Housing requisition has increased this year by 5.4%. Again, this is something that the town collects on behalf of Mountain View Seniors Housing. Next slide, please. So maybe I'll stop here. Was there any questions in regards to the budget before we get to the actual tax rate scenarios and how to fund that? No? Okay. So as mentioned, the first option provided is what the proposed budget is based on today. This is leaving the tax rates at the current 2023 rates. It would result in an increase to tax revenue, however, because of the increased assessment base of $369,690, and then the rest would be funded through the tax stabilization reserve. On the screen is how this would impact our residents. So residential overall impact would be $160, and non-residential, the overall impact would be $838. Again, significant part of that is the education school tax, which will not change in any of the scenarios, that those 2 line items stay the same for all. Are there any questions on option 1?
Deputy Mayor Ryan?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. Through you to Director Lindeman. Where does the supplementary assessment tax, or supplementary assessment bylaw fit within our tax rate scenarios? Is that,
So
will
right
that
now,
have an impact
it
if it was passed?
is possible that it could have an impact. Right now, the town of Olds does not have a supplementary assessment bylaw, so that is something that council would have to consider if you wanted to implement that.
Okay.
It would have to be passed by May 1st of this year, and then it looks at any assessment that is, any builds that are complete from the time that so January 1st to, I think it's October is when we implement that assessment. Any completions that happen in there would be then taxed in 2024 as opposed to having that tax in 2025.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on option 1? Okay, so the next option, option 2. This was an option that was presented in the RFD for consideration. This option is to use the tax stabilization reserve to fund the OFL expenses of $238,315 as opposed to using tax revenue. This would result in a slight decrease to tax rates. However, with the increase in assessment, we would still see an increase in our tax revenue. The impact here on residents, so residential homeowners would see a $131 increase, and then non-residential $732. Okay, and then we've also included in here an option 3, which would be all of the proposed budget adjustments today would be funded through reserves. And so there would be a decrease to the tax rate of 3.3%, minimizing the impact on residents, of course, but that is a significant draw from reserves of $464,000. Councillor Cummins? Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So just a clarification, I think, when we talk about reserves, we're just talking about tax dollars we've collected previously. So is tax dollars one way or tax dollars a different way? And when we spend from our reserves, there's a need to replenish our reserves by collecting tax dollars in the future. So if I'm understanding the math correctly, we either take the money that we've collected as taxes previously to pay for expenses that are today and then have to refill those bank accounts later with future tax dollars. We tax people appropriately today for the expenses of today, or we count on the future tax dollars for paying things in the future. But in the end of the day, it's all needs to be paid for, and it's all tax dollars. Just where it's coming from and where it needs to go. In my opinion, paying our current expenses through current revenue seems to be a more appropriate avenue. But in the end of the day, it is all taxpayer money.
Yep, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor and Director. And my brief comment is none of these scenarios are overly palatable. Either you're, as I said, taxing today's residents or drawing on reserves from previous taxation and setting aside funds. So none of these are palatable, but at the end of the day, very necessary. And I'll, through a motion, I'll look to make once we've done this discussion, again, it just highlights the pressures and the challenges that this town and other municipalities have around limited revenue streams and increasing cost and aging infrastructure and the impacts that has on service levels, and the challenges we have. And I'm particularly, people around this table, I think, know my thoughts around taxation and affordability and trying to make things work on a variety of fronts, but I'm particularly frustrated in the example in the case of education, where I think, Director, you've shown the increase year over year of 9.5% on the education requisition. I believe the 2024 provincial budget for K-12 spending education-wise increased 4.4%. So when our residents start to look and question, service levels and taxation and what we're trying to do. A prime example is in the case of the education requisition, where the dollar amount is going up over 9% year over year. The budget allocation from the province only went up 4.4%. I know there are trickles and other streams and how that revenue that the province collects gets shared. But it just highlights again the growing gap that we have here at the municipal level. So.
No more questions? Okay, so just going back to the motions then that would be required. The tax rate bylaw, we're just looking for first reading today. The one item you will see is highlighted in your packages is the county residential. We do need to wait for the county to pass their tax rate bylaw before we can, so this may be amended in second reading on the 22nd, but that would be the only one then, depending on if you decide. As I said, the option used in the motions is option 1, so if you make the motions as presented, that is.
Thank you, Director Sheena. And Councillor Daly has a question.
I was actually going to make the motion.
Councillor Daly has a motion.
I move that council accept the tax rate bylaw 2024-15 using option 1 be given first reading.
Yeah, so the tax rate bylaw that is presented is option 1, so you just, the tax rate bylaw as presented.
It's
Thank
for
you very much.
clarification.
Yeah. So we have a motion from Councillor Daly that the tax rate bylaw 2024-15 is given first reading. I will then call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you, Councillor Daly. I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. And just given the information that Director Lindeman has supplied us with regards to the supplementary assessment bylaw, I'd like to make a motion that we bring the supplementary assessment bylaw back to our next meeting for full reading. All 3 readings.
Theo Williams.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. And just for to all of council, just to provide some background, we spoke about this last year as well, but it never did come forward. But just on research done then, we don't have what was achieved in revenue from previous supplementary tax bylaws, but we can bring that back. The cost to do it was around $5,000, but if I look at our current growth right now, it's under 2%. So each percentage of growth is worth around $7,000 in revenue, net municipal taxes. So chances are we didn't grow that much in Q1 or Q4 of last year after the valuation date has passed. So. But we also won't know that unless we do the full bylaw. So there's also staff implications, of course. We do have to reprint all the notices and mail them out and deal with those phone calls of mostly confused people because the vast majority of assessments won't change. It's just for the growth assessments. But if we're only 1.8%, I'm just not sure council will get much value once we take off those costs. But if council wishes to proceed, then of course you can consider it on the 22nd as well.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Blatz and then back to Deputy Mayor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dolan. Through you to CO Williams. So then just for clarification, though, once we pass this bylaw, do we have to pass it every year? So it has to be, but even so, I mean, I guess unless it's going to be a negative valuation to the town due to staff constraints and et cetera, then it's probably something we'd have to consider. But who knows, too, it could be any revenue that we could potentially generate, I think is a win-win, is it not?
In a vacuum, yes, you're right. We do need revenue, and that would generate revenue. I think it's more of council's purview in low impact situations like this to consider the politics of it, the optics of it. I know in my experience in counties previous to this, it was a bit more popular if it had that one oil and gas facility that had come online partially or late, and you had already budgeted for, in this case, millions of dollars out of one facility. For the town of Olds, I would have to see the numbers myself, but for 1.8% growth on residential, it just doesn't seem like we would get a lot out of it, and perhaps, do more optics harm than good. But that's for council to decide.
Excuse me, thank you. I think the proper order I had next was Deputy Mayor Ryan again, and then Councillor Wilson and Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. Okay, so you basically, so you're saying that it's probably revenue neutral or not much of a gain for the amount of time that our staff would be taking up as well, and so it's probably not worth it to do it this year? Is that what you're saying?
I would want to walk that back a little bit. I don't want council's decision to be influenced on the impact of staff. If council decides to do it, we'll do it, and with a smile on our face even. That's fine. It's just I want council to be aware of the holistic impact of this and the potential reward, I guess, of doing it. So.
Yes, Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl, and through you to the CEO, and in keeping with this theme, I guess I'm very interested in, which the CEO has alluded to, the size of the prize, and given the fact that our growth in the town has not been significant or large, although we are looking certainly to change that in the coming years. So but the CEO mentioned some figures, and it dazzled me and woke me up, I guess. So I think I just want to confirm, you mentioned 1% growth equates to 7,000 in taxes. I just want to make sure I heard that right, or what those numbers were.
Yeah.
Because again, I'm interested in the size of the prize, but I'm trying to balance that with, because based on my speech a little while ago, I don't think we want to be walking away from incremental tax dollars. So.
And I know someone's going to do the math and prove me wrong, but I look at net dollars to tax rolls. So if through this, estimating, we might add another, if we had 2% growth, that would be just under $15,000 based on current tax rates. So, but that's mix of residential and non-residential. Residential's worth a lot less, dollar for dollar, or assessment percentage than non-residential. So generally speaking, I'd be surprised if we got much more than $10,000 gross out of a supplementary tax bylaw. Then you take away the assessment costs, which are contracted third party. The assessor has to obviously go around and do that. You get into, again, we're in, as you can tell, inflationary times with real estate. There is the potential, improbable, that inflation has changed as well, whereas that valuation date in Alberta is July 1st, when all properties are kind of given that, here's your mark for the year. The condition date is December 31st. So which state is the property in? That's for the development permits. So there's a chance that the inflation has changed between July 1st of 2023 and whenever we might do this supplementary tax bylaw on either end, and I don't know. So there's variables, but
Yeah, no, and truly, a truly supplemental, and I appreciate the clarification, and again, part of it is my confusion, because my benchmark is 1% tax increase generates 100,000. So again, I needed to make that mind shift from 1% tax increase versus 1% growth, and the 7 or 15K or whatever, so I appreciate that.
Cummings?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If my memory serves me correctly, we debated during the debate to repeal the bylaw or to not approve it 2 years ago when we took it off the books. We had two arguments on it. One is the economic impact of the bylaw was negligible. The other one was the optics of future economic development, that it's just another encouragement to get your building done. There's no rush, there's no speed to get it done at a specific time or anything like that. And those seem to be the two conversations we had when we talked about this bylaw. And again, without all of the new numbers or stuff like that, it's a little hard to decide whether or not it's gained economic importance or economic relevance. So I don't really support the bylaw or the motion that was asked, but I would support asking administration to come back with an economic assessment on the viability of the bylaw rather than here's the bylaw, let's vote on the bylaw. Is it worth bringing the bylaw back to council and give us some information on whether or not it is valuable? The off-the-cuff dollar amounts and percentages are great, but if we have some consolidation and some, yep, we've done some research and here's our actual numbers, and administration believes it is or is not an economically viable plan moving forward, then we can go back and revisit and say, we think it is, and we'd like to have a bylaw or not.
Thank you, Councillor Blatz, and then back to Deputy Mayor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl, but we do have to pass this if we're going to by May 1st, so we're running out of time. So time is of the essence if we really do wish as council to consider this type of a bylaw. I mean, although I can appreciate numbers would be great, but maybe going forward, we start to track what the potential impacts could be in the future, if that could be a suggestion. If that doesn't work, then I don't know what the solution is, but I think we're under the time is of the essence if we do wish to approve this bylaw.
Correct. And not to put words in Director Lindeman's mouth, but I'm sure she would be happy to put together a robust, no, I'm joking. Between now and April 22nd, we can certainly just do some research if council wants on what previous iterations of a supplementary tax bylaw did bring to the town. I can firm up my numbers so Darren doesn't, pillar me too closely for my accuracy or lack thereof on that growth rate. Because right now residential is 1.18, and I can do, what is that worth in municipal tax dollars, if council wishes for April 22nd, but the bylaw would have to be passed all three readings on that date, including consensus for third reading. So everyone has to be on board.
Yeah, thank you very much on that, and we have Deputy Mayor Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I'm good. Councillor Blatz asked the question. Thank you.
Very good. Do we have any more questions? No? Okay, we do have a motion on the floor right now from Deputy Mayor Ryan, and I'd like the legislative clerk to read it back, just to remind us what the motion is.
Hi, what I captured was that Councillor Ryan made a motion to create and prepare and bring forward to the next council meeting a supplementary assessment bylaw for all readings.
For all three readings. Very good. I will now call for the vote. Those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much for the discussion and dialogue, both administration and council. Page 56, please. We're moving down to page 56, item 5A. Spring of budgets. Director Lindeman, is that you?
So that was the presentation I went through. We did miss the last slide on the capital budget, so I'll quickly run through that. In the capital budget, there are no additions or deletions, just 2023 carryforwards of 1.6 million, bringing the total new proposed capital budget to $5,047,331.
I was wondering why all those nice slides were there, and I kept thinking, I'm sure I read that as spring budget adjustments. Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Director Lindeman at this point then? We've seen the slides and she's reviewed them, etc. And then I would ask for a motion, please. Councillor, yes, we have two motions. We're going to do number one first and then number two. Councillor Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that council approves the adjustments to the 2024 approved operating budget in the amount of $659,247 for a total 2024 operating budget of $34,703,669. Sorry, 969.
So that is $34,703,969. Sorry. Okay. We'll both get that through. Director Linderman. Thank you.
That's a lot of pressure. $34,703,969.
Thank you very much. That's the first motion on the floor. It's been a long discussion here this afternoon. I will call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much, and I'd like the second motion, please. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I make the motion that council approves the adjustments to the 2024 approved capital budget in the amount of $1,596,331 for a total 2024 capital budget of $5,047,331.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. It's okay. Well done. I will now call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. Yep. And now we do have Councillor Wilson who would like to speak.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl, and I'll try and be brief. And further to my comments a couple of minutes ago, just a little bit of background. So as we all know, there's always continually and increasingly so these days discussion around downloading of services and costs, certainly from the provincial government to the municipal level, such as the town of Olds, and which then has an impact as those services are what I'll call transferred or downloaded to the municipal level, putting challenges and constraints on local government. We all know we have limited revenue generating capabilities. Our expenses are ever increasing, and which then has an impact to our service levels in the community, and hence ultimately tax rates and taxation to our local citizens. So what I'd like to do is put forward a motion to request administration to prepare a summary of services and associated costs downloaded and transferred by the province to the town of Olds. I've noted over the last 4 years, I'm open to a different number, but downloaded to the town of Olds in the last 4 years, and report to council by the end of May 2024. And I think if this motion passes, I think this information will be critical for council through its advocacy efforts with and in our engagement with elected officials at the provincial level. It'll be essential and critical information as we engage with our citizens. I'm sure Director Lindeman has already started the 2025 budget cycle and data gather, so which is probably never ending. So this information, again, if this motion is passed, will arm council with information certainly to approach provincial elected officials as well as engage with our citizens and inform our citizens and educate them again around what some of those ever increasing costs are that are being transferred from provincial to municipal level. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, for sharing that information. I have only one thought. It's a good motion. However, I have one thought about capacity for our administration. I know our CAO has 2 major projects on the go right now, and one due by the end of May. So I respect the motion. However, speaking, I would like to ensure that he has the capacity to do this with his staff.
Thanks, Mayor Dahl. I do appreciate the concern. Capacity is something that's always in short supply these days. But I think given the context, and I think the value not just to advocate or have better tools to advocate to the provincial government, but also to perhaps help explain to our citizenry the rationale behind tax cuts and service level adjustments, that it'll be time well spent, and Sheen will be happy to do it. I'm joking.
Appreciate the motion that we have on the floor. Are there no further questions? Deputy Mayor Ryan, or are you ready for a motion? Are you ready for comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Dahl. I just wanted to comment and say that the timing is probably perfect if we could get it back by before we actually go to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities conference, which is in early June. I mean, I know it's nationwide conference, but there could be some information we can gather there as well, and sharing of information with perhaps MLAs that might stop in. And I think that all the information we can gather on this kind of a a topic would be good for us with advocacy going forward. So I appreciate the motion from Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walsh.
Well, yeah, Deputy Mayor Ryan mentioned federal, so I'm thinking, why not add the carbon tax, what that impact is on our municipality if we're going to be speaking to people at FCM?
Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, no, excellent point. I appreciate Councillor Ryan's comments, an excellent point by Councillor Walsh. I'm certainly agreeable to amending, a friendly amendment to the motion to include the carbon tax, very, again, apropos and timely, so, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see no more questions, so we have the motion on the floor as friendly amendment. I will call for the vote. Those in favor? That is carried. Very good. We're going to now move down to development permits, page 67 of the agenda. And we're going to invite Cal Sloan to the table. Very good. Thank you for being here. Municipal Land Use Planner.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This first development permit application is for a secondary suite at 6619 57th Street in the Highlands. This application is at council because it requires a variance that is greater than what development officer can approve. The variance in question is related to the entrance for the suite on the side of the house, as seen on the bottom of the screen here. The entrance has some stairs going down into it, and because there's a window above it, the building code requires that the stairs are covered, and that roof extension extends into the side yard setback to a greater degree than we can approve in administration. We've spoken with the building inspector, and he has no problem with moving forward with approving this for the building permit side of things, so we need council approval for the development permit. So the recommendation is that council approve development permit application 24-006 as presented, subject to the conditions listed in the attached draft development permit. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Sloan. I would open the floor to council at this point if you have questions for Mr. Sloan. Deputy Mayor Ryan?
Thank you very much. I just have a question with regards to how large is this going to be? Do we have any idea of the dimensions at all? Because it doesn't say here in the council package.
Thank you for the question. I don't have that information on hand. If it's not all of the information I have is in the package as well. It is a basement suite, so it would be just the floor area of the house, minus mechanical room.
Sorry to interrupt. Not the size of the suite I'm talking about. I'm talking about the size of the cover.
Thank you.
I can't even read the what was in the package. It was unreadable, period, and I can't even see how big the size is going to be.
Okay.
On this, even on this screen.
Yeah. Can I grab the mouse?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so it comes out to within 80 centimeters of the property line, I believe, and the stairs are 91 centimeters in width. The cover is, I actually see some dimensions there in gray text. Yeah, so 0.91 times 1.22 meters is that's the concrete landing. So, yeah. Yeah, it's 1.71 minus that from, I'm sorry that the dimensions aren't super clear.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Oh, go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and just a supplemental, so what, so this is required by what was it again?
Yes, it's
Like-
the building code requires an entrance to a building that is below a window to have a roof for fire separation, so that if there is, so that, I guess if there's a fire upstairs at that window coming out, then the tenants downstairs can still safely use that door to get out.
For the clarity.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. Through you to Development Officer Sloan, just a simple question. So this roof extension would not and should not present any issues in terms of obstruction or visibility or safety issues or falling snow falling on a neighboring property or drainage or anything? There's no concerns there, correct?
That's correct, and the regulations that we have pertaining to drainage would still apply, so that if in the future there are issues that do come up from runoff from this, then we can address that in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Daly?
You, Mayor Dahl, and just to go along with that, then the neighbors have been canvassed and there is no objections, and they know what's going on here as well?
Correct, thank you. And it's actually through conversations with the neighbors that we realized their concrete pad at the back, it exists, but they built a fence around it. So the property actually had 0 on-site parking stalls. That has since been rectified. They've changed the fence. So there are 3 parking spaces available on the property, 2 for the main dwelling and 1 for the suite, but that came up through conversations with the neighbors.
Good question. Are there any further questions for Mr. Sloan? Go ahead, Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. If there's no other questions, I need clarification on suite amenity space.
As far as I know, that's just the backyard, maybe some patio furniture. It's not necessarily a requirement of ours. It's something that the applicant chose to show on their plans. But I think it is just backyard space that the tenants are allowed to use.
Thank you. I hadn't seen that before, so thank you very much.
That is an interesting new idea. Very good. I would then ask for a motion, please. Councillor Blatz?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that council approve development permit application DP 24-006 as presented, subject to the conditions listed in the attached draft development permit.
We have a motion on the floor. I will now call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you, Mr. Sloan. Would you be carrying on then with the next item of development permit for the home occupation? Item 5C, page 76.
Yes, thank you again. This application is for a Class 2 home occupation, Class 2 meaning that clients will visit the property. The reason it is at council today is for a variance to the, or sorry, not for a variance, but because the development officer is limited for Class 2 home occupations to approving a maximum of 20 clients per week. This application is for up to 60 clients per week, which leads me to an amendment. I spoke with the client this morning in the draft development permit condition. It's wrong. That was the last permit I was looking at. Condition number 4. It states the business shall not be visited by more than 12 clients per day and 6 per week. It should be 12 clients per day and 60 per week. And it's that reason that this application is at council. The business is for a medium psychic Reiki studio, essentially what we call personal service. So the recommendation is that council approve application 2024 I've lost the number now. 026 as amended, subject to the conditions in the draft permit.
Thank you much. Yes, so that's subject to item 4 in the development permit. Very good. If there's no questions, I'd ask for a motion. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I do have a question.
Yes?
Okay, and through you to Development Officer Sloan. And my apologies if I missed it in the reading material, but again, have we canvassed the neighboring homeowners, residents, and they have no objections to this level of traffic or increased traffic in a business operation? Thank you.
Thank you, and that's correct. We did circulate this to adjacent property owners and those within 20 meters of the subject parcel. As far as I know, I haven't heard from any neighbors, and I haven't seen any correspondence that we've received from any neighbors.
I would just like to ask Mr. Sloan, we used to always get that information in our request for decision. It's always something I know myself, it seems other councillors are always looking for. If we have had circulated the letters and if there was any objections, etc., is there any way we could get that put back in again for the future? Thank you very much. Thank you. Deputy
Yes, sorry. We can do that. I also wanted to note that upon approval, we circulate to the same neighbors because there isn't a 21-day appeal period that they have an opportunity to use.
That's very important for the people that are viewing as well as council. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl, and through you to Mr. Sloan. With regards to the conditions, I don't, forgive me if I didn't see it, but I don't see anything about parking. Is there parking on the street? Is there parking is there a driveway? Like, how do they accommodate all these people coming and going?
I believe the parking is in the driveway, but yeah.
So I would assume that each client would come in and then they'd depart and the next client would come within the next 20 minutes, etc. Okay, very good. Thank you. I don't have a motion on the floor for this as amended. Who would like to make the motion? Councillor Cummings?
Sorry, just one quick comment, then I'll make the motion very simply. So
Thank you.
Page 78 of the package does show the mail-out map, that letters were mailed out, just for some clarification there. But I'll make the motion here that, sorry, I'm just going to go back to the page. The council approved development permit application DP 24-026 as presented, subject to the conditions listed in the attached draft development permit as amended.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm looking in here. I don't have page 78. Maybe that's why. Okay, thank you very much. We have a motion on the floor. I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for your time today. We'll move down to page 82, please. And item 6A, correspondence and information. All right. Does any I'll get a motion on the floor first, and then I'll ask a question. Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that the correspondence and information reporting ending April 8th, 2024 be received for information.
Thank you very much. Does council have any questions to either 4 items of correspondence? The letter, Office of the Minister, Environment and Protected Areas, who's doing all of this before April 18th? Do you know, C.O. Williams?
Thanks, Mayor Dahl. Since the Water Commission is the license holder, it is on them to complete by the timeline. they have since, their technical committee has since met and has asked individual municipalities to also adopt their own drought management plans, which will take a little bit longer, but the commission is due to respond by April 18th, and by April 22nd, council will have the water conservation bylaw, which hopefully will be the primary component of our drought management strategy, but there will be addendums to that as the commission builds out its plan.
I was trying to piece that together on the order, but thank you for sharing that. And we have a motion from Councillor Walsh on the floor, so I will call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. We are now at page 107 of our agenda, item 7A, and this is the Chief Administrator Office Report. CEO Williams?
Yes, thanks again. So there's nothing updated from the action items list on the wrap report for which should say March, but says December on the green title. Please disregard. With the end of winter, then the restart of winter, and its end again, we have obviously road issues, drainage, and sidewalk trails as the standouts there, and not surprisingly, ice and running water were the concerns, but overall very positive results through the RAP program, and again, they continue to help us identify these issues, and people are generally very positive and offer constructive criticism, so we're seeing all around a positive experience, I believe, for everyone through this program, so thanks again. The only verbal item I had was just an FYI to council and the public that weather-dependent street sweeping is due to commence the week of April 15th. So that obviously may be adjusted, but we, as council may recall, we decided to trial for 1 year a fully contracted program. So the contractor has been booked, and if anything changes, I shall let you know. And that's all I had.
Thank you very much.
Those are the closed portion.
Was there a question? Councillor Cummings?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I did have the joys the other day of watching some cold fill, is that what it's called? Cold mix. Pothole repair being done in the uptown area and whatnot, which is a great start because obviously there's lots of potholes. Do we have an estimated time frame on when we'll be able to acquire some of the hot mix for doing the larger patchwork from our IR paver? I know Director Pedro is not here, but maybe you have an idea.
So I don't have an exact date. I know we're waiting on a product delivery. I believe it was delayed on Friday, but more hand patching material because the cold mix that you saw last week, it just doesn't last that long. But I would reckon by early May we'll be up and running with the IR paver once the batch plant's open. We could probably get it out of one of the major cities. It's just a lot more expensive to do right now for it to haul it in, but by early May we should be up and running with the IR paver.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor Ryan?
Thank you, Mayor Dahl, and just through you to the CAO with regards to that going a little bit further forward, would that IR paver be used to patch the 61st, because we've had those water main breaks and now we've got, the road had to be dug up in those I don't know, 3 or 4 spaces now, and would we use that, or do we have to do an overlay on that eventually?
A good question. It's something we want to explore a bit further too. I don't have enough information with the 61st digs. I know the smaller digs. If you know the everyone's worst nightmare on 54th Street, heading east towards the auction mart, we have those long-standing digs. Those are smaller in areas, so we're hoping the IR paver can tackle those. And then, again, the problem is the time it takes to do larger patches. But I think for some of the larger utility digs, yes. I'm just not sure about 61st Street. In some cases, there's curb and gutter involved, which adds a little bit of issues. Just when you have to butt up against the new curb, the IR paver may not be the best machine for that. But yeah, we do want to explore its use more fully. Especially now, council approved that additional staff member. We can have 2 dedicated people on the IR paver, so we don't have as much opportunity cost lost. So. But short answer, I think so.
Thank you for sharing that, CO Williams. And for everyone, I would ask for a motion, please, to accept for information. Deputy Mayor Ryan?
Thank you, Mayor Dell. I move that the Chief Administrative Officer report be accepted for information.
I'll call for the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Very good. It is the end of our agenda, other than moving into a closed session. So before we move into a closed session, I will note for our viewers, please, I understand we have young viewers too, so everybody needs to be aware. When council goes into a closed session for continued participation in the virtual council meeting, stay online in the live stream meeting platform, and the meeting stream will be replaced by a graphic and some music will play. If you choose to shut down your live stream, please take a look at our social media on the Town of Old's website. We do have YouTube. I would ask for a motion, please, to move into a closed session for Section 24, Advice from Officials Healthcare. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I make the motion that council go into that closed session, as you said, under Section 24, advice from officials regarding healthcare, with all those in attendance remaining.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. I'll call for the vote. We will be moving in at 3:01 p.m. to close session. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you very much for your. We have now reconvened back to our regular council meeting for our Rise and Report. Calling Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Mayor Dahl. I move that council accepts for information from CAO received in closed session in regards to healthcare.
Thank you, Councillor Daly. I'll call for the vote. Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. At this time, I will adjourn the meeting at, time is it? 3:48 p.m.